Welcome to The Explainer. Ever get that feeling, that nagging thought that maybe there's some secret group out there pulling the strings on world events? Well, today we're diving deep into one of the most persistent ideas in all of modern history, the theory of a secret world government.
So who's really running the show from the shadows? I mean, is it for real? A hidden cabal? Ancient societies? Maybe even the Vatican? All secretly calling the shots? It's time to cut through the noise, separate fact from fiction, and figure out who, if anyone, is actually in charge.
All right, so our investigation has to start with the most famous name in the entire conspiracy playbook, right? A group that's been wrapped in mystery for centuries, the Freemasons.
Okay, so this is really the heart of the whole thing.
On one hand, you've got the myth, a sinister cult, planning world domination. But then you look at the history, the reality, and it tells a completely different story. It's rooted in something, well, way more practical. We're talking about medieval guilds for actual builders who just wanted to protect their trade secrets.
And you see, over the centuries, these guilds of operative masons, and that means men who literally worked with stone, they went through this massive transformation. By 1717, they officially became what's called speculative masons, basically a philosophical club for thinkers, for leaders, and yeah, they eventually attracted some seriously powerful people, like George Washington himself.
So how in the world did we get from philosophical club to satanic cult? The answer is, you're not going to believe this. It was a prank. A huge, elaborate hoax cooked up in the 1890s by a French writer named Léo Taxil. He just invented these wild stories about devil worship, and later he even admitted he was shocked that people actually bought it, that they took his fables for cash.
And look, if you still need one last nail in the coffin for that world domination theory, here it is. In just the last 60 years or so, Masonic membership in the U.S. has absolutely cratered. I mean, it went from a peak of 4 million all the way down to under 800,000 today. So far from some expanding all-powerful empire, it's a shrinking fraternity.
But okay, the Masons are just one piece of this giant puzzle. Now we've got to turn to an even more notorious name, a group that's supposedly so powerful, they're still pulling the strings today. You know what I'm talking about? The Illuminati.
The myth we all know today is, well, it's epic, right? A globe-spanning organization secretly controlling everything from finance to the media. But the historical reality? A little different. It was actually a tiny group of Enlightenment thinkers over in Bavaria. They were against state power, they lasted for a whopping 9 years, and then the government shut them down in 1785. And that's it. That's the whole story.
So, how did this small, long-gone German society become this huge 21st century boogeyman? Well, you might be sensing a pattern here, because it started as a prank. Yep, back in the 1960s, some writers at Playboy magazine decided to fight against what they saw as this rigid societal conformity by deliberately spreading disinformation. They actually called it Operation Mindfuck.
One of those writers, a guy named Robert Anton Wilson, he basically said the whole goal was to create so much chaos and confusion that people's rigid beliefs would just collapse. So they started seeding pop culture with fake letters and these totally bizarre stories about the long-dead Illuminati, and in the process, they accidentally created a myth that would become way bigger than they ever imagined.
Okay, I know what you're thinking, but what about the dollar bill? That's gotta be the biggest piece of proof, right? Well, let's just break it down. That all-seeing eye, it's not Illuminati. It's actually an old Christian symbol for God, the Eye of Providence. The 13-step pyramid, that's for the 13 original colonies. And the date, 1776, that's for the Declaration of Independence, not the year the Illuminati were founded. It's really just a collection of American and religious symbols, not some secret society's business card.
And all this brings us to the third, and maybe the most ancient point in this whole conspiracy triangle, a place of immense power, of deep history, and, if you believe the legends, unimaginable secrets. We are, of course, talking about the Vatican.
I mean, the legends that have sprung up around the Vatican's secret archives are just wild. A time-viewing machine called the Chronovisor, a book of ultimate black magic. But when you actually start digging into these claims, a really clear pattern starts to show up. They almost always trace back to works of fiction, confessed hoaxes, or forgeries made way later. But, and this is a really big but, this is where things get complicated, because sometimes conspiracies are real. In the 1980s, a massive scandal blew up that involved a rogue Masonic lodge called P2, the Vatican's own bank, and a whole web of corrupt Italian politicians. It was a genuine conspiracy of power and money. And it's these real-life scandals that give the fictional stories so much power. It's that perfect little grain of truth that makes the whole myth seem believable.
So, we've seen how these grand theories are often built on a foundation of pranks, fiction, and, the occasional real-life scandal. But that just brings up the biggest question of all, doesn't it? If the proof is so shaky, why are these stories so incredibly powerful? Why do we want to believe them?
And the answer isn't hidden away in some secret archive. It's actually right inside our own heads. Our brains are hardwired to find patterns, to create stories that help us make sense of a world that often feels chaotic and random. When things feel out of control, a simple story about a hidden group calling the shots can be, well, strangely comforting. It implies that at least somebody has a plan.
And when you really look at it, you can see this clear life cycle. It's almost like a recipe for a grand conspiracy. First, a real-world event happens that creates a lot of confusion or fear. Then, a simple, secret story pops up to explain it. Next, you get hoaxes and satire, like from Leo Taxil or the Playboy writers, that get mistaken for actual evidence. Pop culture then grabs hold of it and blows it up into a global phenomenon. And before you know it, the exciting story becomes way more compelling than the messy, complicated truth. The legendary astronomer Carl Sagan warned us about this exact thing decades ago. He said he had this foreboding about a future where we lose the ability to think critically, to question information and authority. A world where we can no longer tell the difference between what feels true and what is true. And that warning, wow, it feels more relevant today than ever before.
So when it all comes down to it, the real secret isn't about the Masons or the Illuminati or the Vatican. It's about us. The most powerful groups in the world aren't necessarily hiding in the shadows. They're the ones shaping the information we see every single day. And in a world overflowing with information, the ultimate question isn't who's in control. It's how do you decide what's real?